the Secretaries General of the Caribbean National Commission for UNESCO, officials of Ministries of Education in the Caribbean, distinguished speakers and panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning and good day. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the third UNESCO Caribbean Futures of Education webinars. Today, we are focusing on work and economic security. COVID-19 has laid bare how vulnerable some jobs are to economic shocks. An overarching question for us is, how can education prepare students for work and economic security as we plan ahead to build back better? According to the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, poverty has been a persistent challenge in the region. While an average of 94% of all eligible students are enrolled in primary schools across the Caribbean region, only 77% completed this level of their education. Only 43% of this cohort completes secondary education. Students from families in the highest 20% of economic distribution in the Latin America and the Caribbean region are 5 times more likely to complete secondary education than those with families earning in the lowest 20%. This inequity is often attributed to low attendance rates among students from low-income countries and the subsequent learning gaps, which compound over time. And COVID-19 has only exacerbated these gaps. This high drop rate has severe implications for development goals in the region. This systemic inequity has been a critical challenge for Caribbean policymakers as they confront developmental challenges in the region, including poverty, lack of access to quality healthcare, and sluggish job creation. In 2020, school closures across the Caribbean region in response to the COVID-19 global pandemic have intensified concerns about growing inequities in the education systems across the region. Lack of economic security, in particular youth unemployment, has implications for other social constructs, including crime and violence. According to the United Nations Caribbean Human Development Report, young people are both the primary victims and perpetrators of crime in the region, with 80% of prosecuted crimes committed by people aged 17 to 29. Transferable skills deemed 21st century skills, including ICT, critical thinking, collaboration, communication, and creativity, have driven most education reforms in the Caribbean for the last decade. Fortunately, some countries such as Barbados and Trinidad and Tobago rank high on the World Economic Forum's Quality of Math and Science Education Index. This ranking above many highly developed countries speaks to successful efforts of their education systems in developing critical thinking, as this is a central part of the mathematics and science fields. The gig economy is another core trend in the future of work. It is characterized by contractors or part-time employees who undertake short-term skilled tasks. To survive in a gig economy, students need to develop specialized, high-quality technical skills and soft skills such as self-regulation, communication, networking, and customer skill services. The Inter-American Development Bank estimates that 10% of those in the Latin America and the Caribbean region who have access to the internet earned money online in 2017. Additionally, they noted more significant participation in the virtual gig economy by men in the region, which is linked to larger skill gaps and digital technologies between the genders. Digital literacy has become an increasingly required skill set for professionals. This 21st century skill is at the heart of preparing students for the fourth industrial revolution. Numerous international organizations such as UNESCO, the ILO, and CARICOM have enacted policies and projects over the last decade to address some of these core issues. In particular, UNESCO UNIVOC, the International Center for Technical and Vocational Education and Training, in their vision statement, articulate their aim to assist member states to develop policies and practices concerning education for the world of work and skills development for employability and citizenship. To this end, the UNESCO UNIVOC International Center, through its TIVET Global Strategy 2016, seeks to foster youth employment and entrepreneurship, promote equity and gender equality, and facilitate the transition to green economies and sustainable societies. The ILO Future of Work initiative aims to promote decent work for all, alternative modalities for working, such as working from home, and flexible work schedules and policies which foster fair treatment for non-standard, part-time, and temporary employees. CARICOM's Human Resource Development 2030 strategy was designed to create a seamless human resource development system, which, in the words of the CARICOM strategy, empowers our people and contributes to the development of the attributes of the ideal Caribbean person. Today, as we also celebrate the International Education Day, we are gathered to see how we can work together to equip citizens with knowledge and skills needed for a rapidly changing labor market as we plan ahead and look at the future potential of education. So we are very keen to work with you today on the Future of Education webinar, but also take this opportunity to commemorate the International Education Day, which has recently been identified as UNESCO as a day for us to celebrate international education and celebrate our efforts of working together with partners to enable quality and equitable education for all and to meet the Sustainable Development Goal 4, focusing on Education 2030. Today, we are gathered to see how we can work together to equip citizens with knowledge and skills for a rapidly changing labor market as we plan ahead and look at the future potential of education. UNESCO stands ready to continue to support for greater exchange and cooperation amongst key actors, many of which are present today, in order to contribute to strengthening opportunities for jobs of the future. We are honored to welcome Ms. Nora Wu as our keynote speaker and Ms. Angela Finlay, who is going to make the presentation, the country presentation. We have with us distinguished panelists and experts who have joined us today, and we thank our colleague Raymond, Dr. Raymond Iriarte from UNESCO ORIARG, who is also going to moderate the roundtable discussion. It is anticipated that today's webinar will facilitate the levels of analysis, knowledge sharing, and perspective setting, and resetting on how future education systems can enable work and economic security in the Caribbean region. Thank you so much for your participation, and we look forward to a stimulating discourse today. I take this opportunity now to introduce our key speaker, Ms. Nora Wu. Ms. Wu works for the Human Capital Project at the World Bank. As a member of the core team, she has supported the team's analytic and operation products, including country briefs, case studies, and thematic research papers on healthy longevity and early childhood development, and most recently on the COVID-19 response. She's the co-author of several books, and she's also a graduate from the International Education Policy Program from Harvard University. She's currently also doing a second master's from Georgetown on data science and analytics. So Ms. Nora Wu, the floor is yours. We look forward to your presentation. We don't hear you, Nora. Is your
Sorry, let me do it again. Apologies for this. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you very well now. Thank you.
Okay. Let me just, the Zoom. Okay. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nora Wu. I'm from the Human Capital Project at the World Bank. Thank you, UNESCO, for the invitation. Thank you, Dr. Ken, and for organizing this webinar. It's my great pleasure and honor to be here today, and I look forward to learning from you all. So before I start to tell you more about the Human Capital Project, I would like to invite you to think about the future we're heading. We are in the era of the fourth industrial revolution. This diagram shows how automation and innovation will shape the future of employment. Automation will shrink employment in all sectors, such as manufacturing. On the other hand, innovation can lead new sectors to emerge. This is the future we are heading. And yet, countries are not well prepared for this rapidly changing world of work. And there is a large human capital gap in the world today. So what is human capital? At the World Bank, we believe human capital is the knowledge, skills, and health that people accumulate over their lives, enabling them to realize their potential as productive members of society. According to our latest Human Capital Index, at pre-COVID level, worldwide, a child born today can expect to achieve on average only 56% of his or her productive potential as a future worker. And we will come back to this. On the right side of the slide, you will see the regional average for the 2020 Human Capital Index, in which the average for Latin America and the Caribbean region is on the yellow bar here. And let me share with you a bit more about the Human Capital Project. Launched in 2018, the Human Capital Project is a global effort to accelerate more and better investment in people for inclusive economic growth. As of January 2021, 79 countries had joined the Human Capital Project, with 8 countries from Latin America and Caribbean region. The Human Capital Project helped to make the case that build a recognition for those expenditures in education, health, and social protection as an investment that builds human capital, especially among the ministries of finance and the ministries of planning. In order to help countries to improve human capital outcome, the Human Capital Project has 3 central components: a measurement agenda, which seeks better country-level measurement on indicators that contribute to human capital outcomes, operational and analytical support for improving human capital outcomes on the ground, and finally, knowledge sharing network to provide policymakers access to the best global knowledge and opportunities to learn from each other in building human capital. So now let me share a little bit more about the Human Capital Index. So the Human Capital Index was introduced as a new way to measure the connection between human capital outcomes and economic productivity of nations. It drew attention to human capital as an economic issue, giving countries a sense of losses ahead if they fail to invest well in next generation, but also a sense of gains if those investments were strengthened. There are 3 ingredients that reflect the building blocks for the next generation's human capital: survival, school, and health. Survival asks the question, will children born today survive to school age? It reflects, unfortunately, a reality in many countries that children do not survive until age 5. School is asking, how much school will they complete and how much will they learn? This reflects the quantity and the quality of education. Also about health. Will the children leave school in good health, ready for future learning and work? So how do we capture the index into one number? We include these 3 components, such as child mortality, quantity and quality of schooling, which includes the number of the year of schooling and the quality adjusted year of schools. And we also use 2 proxies for health, stunting and adult survival rate. So with this component, the last step is the productivity of a future worker. This is relative to the benchmark of complete education and full health, which gives us an index ranging from 0 to 1. So as I mentioned before, the global average for the 2020 Human Capital Index is 0.56, which we can interpret as worldwide, a child born today can expect to achieve on average only 56% of his or her productive potential as a future worker. And here is the graph showing the correlation between GDP per capita and the Human Capital Index for Latin America and the Caribbean region. While the correlation between the HCI and GDP per capita is strong, human capital does not always in lockstep with economic development. In Latin America and the Caribbean, we can see that in several countries, in the lower right corner, human capital is lower than per capita income would suggest. This means that among those well-resourced rich countries where human capital development still hasn't met the potential that one could have anticipated. And here is a closer look at the 9 Caribbean countries that have been captured in the 2020 Human Capital Index. Beyond this one number, the Human Capital Index has also attempted to have socioeconomic desegregation, subnational desegregation to provide a more nuanced look for each nation. And another update from the Human Capital Index is about utilizing human capital. It's calculated by Human Capital Index multiplied by employment rate, which gives us a sense of the utilization of human capital, or we call it UHCI. There are 2 measures taking place. Apologies. There are 2 measures taking place. In the basic UHCI, utilization is measured as a fraction of the working age population that is employed. In the full UHCI, introduce this concept of better employment, which includes types of jobs that are common in high productivity countries. More specifically, better employment is defined as non-agricultural employees plus employers. As you can see from the graphs here, both utilization measures are roughly U-shaped in per capita income, suggesting human capital is particularly underutilized in middle income countries. Importantly, the Human Capital Index and the UHCI, utilizing Human Capital Index, only measure the effect of human capital on the labor market earnings and the future GDP per capita. This is only one benefit of human capital. In many other domains, human capital also improves well-being and other aspects of economic development. Another useful resource I'd like to share is the country brief. These briefs are tailored for each country where the 2020 Human Capital Index is available to provide policymakers a helpful reference to engage in conversations and dialogues. So here you can see the example from Jamaica. The first page provides the Human Capital Index update, which includes all components of the Human Capital Index, as well as socioeconomic groups and gender disaggregation. The second page on the right starts with a regional narrative that sets the tone for each region. It then includes domestic resource utilization and mobilization, including health, education, and social assistance spending as a percentage of GDP. It also includes a list of complementary indicators that go across and beyond education and health sectors. For Latin America and the Caribbean, the indicators include learning poverty, deaths from the non-communicable disease, share of youth not in education, employment, or training, drinking water, hygiene, electricity, and so on. For each indicator on the second page, we also offer a comparison between its regional average and income level average. The country briefs are publicly available and can be found on our website. Besides that, we also help countries to design and develop programs that improve human capital outcomes. Here is an example of the theory of change, which asks the question, what does it take to improve learning adjusted years of schooling? From the upper side, we list what would it take for learners, teachers, classrooms, schools, and education systems. Then we also provide examples of key multi-sectoral contributions, which is what we believe the whole of a government approach is critical in improving human capital outcomes. We hope this can help country teams and government to develop effective programs to better support the human capital agenda. Last, before I conclude, I do want to raise this important issue on the impact of COVID-19 on human capital. The simulated impact from the 2020 Human Capital Report shows that without any intervention, an entire generation could be left behind, and the decade of human capital progress could be reversed. For education, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought two massive shocks. School closure have left most students on the planet out of school, and the negative impact of unprecedented global economic contraction on family incomes has increased the risk of school dropouts. We are still in this middle of the pandemic, and we need to work together to protect and invest in our own people. Going forward, while there is no single path towards the future of education, we did find some commonalities among the high-performing systems. First, pursue systematic reform, and we've been providing guidelines on policy actions and frameworks. Second, support by political commitment and the whole of a government approach. And this has been what we've been pushing for our agenda. Third, focus on equity and inclusion. This is very timely, as we all know that COVID-19 has exacerbated inequality globally. On the basis of evidence and focus on results. And this is where products like Human Capital Index can play a role. Also to ensure necessary financial commitment. And that brings the work with Ministry of Finance and Planning and other agencies to work together in this agenda. Last but not least, make smart investment in education technology. We really need to play an active role, not just to predict the future, but also in creating the future. So this is all about my presentation today. I hope it has provided you an informative view of why we think it's important to link the human capital and economic productivity and the security. For more information, please visit our website or email us. Thank you so much for your interest and attention, and I hope you are all staying well in these trying times. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nora, for a very rich discussion and for really sharing with us the evidence from, the Human Capital Index. Before we proceed, I would like to ask you to make a distinction for us because we've been working with the Human Development Index for all these years, and now we have the Human Capital Index. So can you just discuss with us some of the distinctions specific to the Human Capital Index vis-a-vis the Human Development Index, and also the implications then for education as we look at economic security and work security?
Thank you, Dr. Ken. Sure. So as we know, the UNDP's Human Development Index is a summary of average achievement among key dimensions of human development. Includes a long and healthy life, being knowledgeable, and having a decent standard of living. So while both indexes spotlight the human capacity as the center of the national development, the Human Capital Index really strengthens the economic case for investing in people. These two indexes are highly complementary, but differ in the ways they're formulated. So the Human Capital Index really link the selective human capital outcomes, as I mentioned before, such as stunting, such as adjusted years of education, with productivity and income levels. This is forward-looking measure of how health and education outcomes will shape the productivity for our future generation of workers. So I hope that helped answer the question related to how the differences between the Human Development Index and the Human Capital Index.
Thank you so much, Nora. If there is a burning question for Ms. Nora, otherwise we will take it at the end of the discussion. But if there is a burning question, please feel free to raise your hand, and I'm happy to, facilitate that. I do have one. You mentioned that there is the country briefs on the Human Capital Index are available on the website. Would it be possible for you to share the link maybe in the chat box so that we can all access the country briefs, specifically the Caribbean country briefs?
Sure, I'm more than happy to do that.
That would be really great. I think I take this opportunity to thank you, Nora, for your excellent presentation. It was very important for us to have this issue, presented so that we can look at this issue and look at the implications of the Human Capital Index and investing in people as we plan for economic and work security in the Caribbean member states. So Latoya, I would like to ask you, are you with us? Would you like to continue, or how is the internet at your end?
Thank you, Fariel. Thank you so much. Yes, Fariel, so Lucette will, it is in and out, and so Lucette will introduce the panelists and roundtable experts, and then I will be coming in to support with the country segment. Yes.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Lucette Montgomery, our colleague from UNESCO Caribbean Cluster Office. The floor is yours.
Good morning again, participants. I am pleased to introduce Miss Angela Finlay, who is the Chief Education Officer in the Ministry of Education, Human Resource Development, and Religious Affairs in Grenada. Ms. Finlay has served in various capacities within the education sector, and she has 29 years of dedicated teaching and learning to primary and secondary school. She has a bachelor's in educational leadership and a master's in educational measurement, and she enjoys cooking, reading, table tennis, chess, and so on, and is married with 4 children. Hello, Ms. Angela Finlay, you may go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you, Lucette, for that introduction. Good morning to all gathered for this webinar series. Okay, for my presentation today, I have captioned it, Work and Economic Security, Grenada's e-learning program. I want to start by looking at Grenada's vulnerability as laid bare by the United Nations report on small island development states. The COVID pandemic is a health and economic crisis for small island economies. For the small island development states, tourism accounts for nearly 30% of the GDP in most member states. Grenada, as a small island development state, ranks 5th among the countries with a heavy reliance on tourism. For Grenada, while the average is 30%, for Grenada, it accounts for more than 40% of the gross domestic product, GDP. Our education system supplies the skilled labor necessary to drive economic recovery. So what is Grenada's reality with the advent of the COVID pandemic? Economists are talking economic. We have seen the reeling of the tourism sector with the closure 2020. Additionally, we have also had closures and partial closures of schools at various points since the 16th of March 2020. We have, as we grapple with the closure of the borders and the closure of schools, we have to contend of various stakeholder groups. And this is having a very adverse effect on the education sector. Now, since the closure of our borders and the closure of schools, we have done a needs assessment to ascertain the extent to which school under lockdown or the closure of schools, the extent to which we can reach students at the various levels. A national survey done in September of 2020 revealed that just about 472 of our students were able to connect with their teachers through cell phone plans, 124 direct wired connection, 8,104 were able to access Wi-Fi at home, a smaller portion, 96, community and schools, and from neighbors, 1,072. Now, this is in the construct of a student enrollment of 21,971. What does internet connectivity therefore mean for our students, or the lack thereof? Percentage with internet access using the aggregation of the data that is presented here shows just about 43% having some form of access to internet. Now, where does that put us in terms of the global reality and the global imperatives? Globally, according to UNESCO's statistics, more than 1 billion children are at risk of falling behind due to school closures. For all children would be one key factor, a long-term priority to reduce learning vulnerabilities. This was taken from UNICEF report, September 2020. So where does Grenada stand in terms of building a resilient economy? With losing income through the downturn in the tourism sector and the closure of schools, which is an imperative if we want to drive a sustainable economy. We in Grenada, the Ministry of Education, have acknowledged that it requires bold innovations to build the long-term capacity of schools to withstand any shock, be it the COVID pandemic or based on our location in the hurricane belt, maybe the hurricanes that can come. How prepared are we to withstand the shocks of two of these catastrophes, you may say, coming together? So Grenada's priority has turned to the development of a robust e-learning ecosystem. What does that e-learning ecosystem entail? We are hoping to impact the lives of students in the pre-primary, primary, and secondary school level in such a way that they can be engaged in continuous learning and there can be continuity of learning despite the downturns or the challenges that may be posed by the COVID pandemic or any other disaster which should befall us. We are looking at e-books or devices and applications for teachers and students. E-assessment and e-learning management system. This is now critical for us. Also the Education Management Information System or EMIS. We have been grappling with that for a while. We have had some on trial and we are purpose that we should get up and running a very robust EMIS. While we grappled with data collection since the advent of the COVID pandemic, it is lamented that if only we had a fully functional education management information system. So we are looking at connectivity and infrastructure. We have two projects running, MESH and CASIP, designed to bring high-speed internet to all schools. This was started before COVID, the advent of COVID, and now more than ever, we are realizing we have to move swiftly ahead to get this project to completion. And also the CASIP, which is going to bring access points throughout the school compound, so that every class in every school would have access to high-speed internet. And this project takes in both schools in the public sector, in the public and private domain, public schools and private schools. And then there is e-learning training. This has stood out as a glaring deficit where we have to retool, train and retrain persons to adapt to the new mode of learning, because we don't envisage that this will go away anytime soon. We do see that the e-learning train is here to stay. And increase employment opportunities. Outputs, learning applications. We have the LernBook tablets for secondary schools. We have tablets and LearnIC for primary schools. Teacher laptops at all levels. Learning management system, that's an MSTAR. Again, this was started before the advent of COVID, and we are so thankful that we had got that far, because this proved to be a very valuable, vital aspect of the e-learning ecosystem as we prepared our students in 2020 to sit the regional examinations. Supporting applications, open office. Connectivity, as I spoke to before, the MESH and the CASIP project. We are also empowering teachers to be champions for IT innovations within their schools. We are calling them senior IT champions. So far, we have identified 77 teachers who have been empowered to take on the role of leading the change innovations within their school environment. Internship and apprenticeship, 34 young persons have been contracted under a new Imani program that's in partnership with the Ministry of Youth. And we now have these persons as junior IT support officers, and we also call them junior IT champions. We have 20 males and 14 females in that category. There is the data which suggests that males are in crisis, but we are so happy that the males have outnumbered the females at the junior IT support officers category. Digital literacy, we are also taking that really to the fore. We have over 1,800 active teachers within the public service, and we have been having short courses to retool those persons. In summer, we had over 1,000 participants, in summer programs. And now we are about to launch a basic IT course. So far, 431 teachers have registered for their participation, and that should roll out in February of this year. LernBooks, we have given LernBooks, they're on loan to teachers, ministry officials, teachers, students, and that's students at the secondary level. All students of the secondary school level now have a LernBook device, which is on loan at a cost of $50 EC dollars per device. A total of 8,723 devices have been distributed to the groups as shown. Support for marginalized students, 141 were able to get those devices without having to pay anything. And these are considered among the most vulnerable of our students. That's at the secondary level. Those ebooks will be coming with innovation, embracing technology. So with those books come simulations, live labs, so students can go in there and actually experience labs and see the experiments as they unfold, 3D graphics and so forth come with those ebooks. And for now, students are really celebrating access that they have and the new opportunities in learning as they embrace technology through the ebooks. Laptops for all teachers, 873 teachers have already received laptops, pre-primary, primary, special needs. And we are now configuring devices for teachers at the secondary school level. We are also giving them to our officers because we realize now that you have to have the tool if you have to be able to deliver as a worker within the education sector. So this is also being taken on board. Psychosocial support, we are also moving on in that category as well. So far, we have assisted with since the lockdown, and we found that within the lockdown, there was a greater need for psychosocial support. So we have had persons, over 1,170 clients virtually, and 545 in-person sessions, and over 680 guidance sessions, all spilling out as needs arising from the COVID pandemic. To date, approximately 21 million EC dollars has been spent in support of our e-learning ecosystem. Corporate partnership has been there to help us as well, interdisciplinary, intersectoral partnership. Private sector devices, and for this we are very grateful, and we do seek the greater support of the corporate citizens. Skills development is also at the fore because as we face the idea of resilience and building back better, without a doubt, we have to place emphasis on CVQs and TVET education. Right now, we have pilots running in 5 schools, 5 secondary schools. We have schools offering the CVQ urban rural schools, one rural, one urban. We have 3 community skills programs in progress. They're building the facilities and they should come on stream in the first quarter of this year. 1 center is retrofitted for furniture making and food processing, as well as garment making, and that should be all completed by the 3rd quarter of this year.
Miss Angela Finlay. Miss Angela Finlay, thank you so much. This has been an excellent presentation. Would you, since we've gone over already quite a bit, would you like to just wrap up?
Okay, so this brings me to the end of the presentation, and I thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share on what Grenada is doing as we seek to combat the challenges that are created by the global pandemic in terms of building resilience and building back better. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was an excellent presentation, and it's so important to see how countries are actually coping with these issues, and then what are some of the lessons we can learn as we plan for the future, which is the purpose of today's webinar. We have with us some questions for you with us. They would like to hear your comments about what has been done in Grenada to enable affordability of internet for students while they are at home, as 43% access. Quite a few children are out of school. So perhaps you would like to respond to this question.
Okay, so in Grenada, we are working with our service providers since the COVID pandemic started, they have made available data packages for cell phones to vulnerable students, to teachers that were displaced, and the homes available at reduced cost. And in the meantime, we are upscaling our access points so that students will be able to get closer to the school environment or in community centers where they can access data. But it's all part of a phased approach. So for now, we thought there's no good having internet in your homes if you don't have a device. So in that order, we have decided a step further to get the connectivity to all homes. So that part is in the long term. We hope we can have the internet there. But for now, devices is a critical one because they can work offline if they do have devices.
Thank you so much, Ms. Angela Finlay. This was very important for us to look at how you're using online and e-learning platforms to enable skills development in Grenada. And I think this will be a very useful example as we and it leads into our next segment, which is going to focus on a roundtable discussion. Our colleague, Dr. Raymond Iriarte is with us. Dr. Iriarte, we are very pleased to have you with us. Dr. Iriarte is the lead specialist in the Latin America and the Caribbean UNESCO Regional Office, and we're focusing on TVET, skills development, ICT, and several other very important issues. So the floor is yours, Dr. Raymond Iriarte.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Latoya. Yes, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Khan. I have the pleasure of introducing, on behalf of Dr. Iriarte, the roundtable experts, and I trust that I have since moved my location, so I trust that I'm in better stead as it relates to my connectivity. We have with us Mr. Gonzalo Grano, who is the program specialist at ILO Center for. He has over 15 years experience in this capacity, program officer. His main focus is on research about social dialogue in the field of TVET in Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as building capacity for employers and workers organizations and for governments to be able to strengthen participation as in TVET bodies. Mr. Grana has done extensive work in the field of youth employment and training policies and programs, as well as TVET and social inclusion. We welcome you, sir. We also have with us Professor Halden Morris, who is the coordinator of the TVET programs and former head of Institute of Education at the University of the West Indies Mona campus. Professor Morris, among other things, other hats that he wears, he also chairs the Caribbean TVET Conference, which is a biennial conference that is held and will be held this year. So we're looking forward to further detail on that, Professor Morris. We also have with us Billy Jack, who is a researcher and professor of economics at Georgetown University. He is also director of the Georgetown University Initiative on Innovation, Development, and Evaluation, and conducts empirical field-based research to assess the impact and effectiveness of development interventions. This is among one of the several hats that he also wears. So we're really in good company, and I'm so sorry that I am shortening the bios because there is so much more to our expert panelist here. We also have with us our youth, who is Mr. Sudarshan Motilal, a 19-year-old undergraduate student at the University of the West Indies in the Department of Economics. He's also a founder and managing director of Inspire Made by Sudarshan Limited, where he continues in his entrepreneurial career as a filmmaker, among other things, such as president of the Rotaract Club of Pinal in Trinidad. Thank you for joining us. And so I hand over to you, our most able moderator, Dr. Iriarte, who is responsible for the management, implementation and monitoring and reporting of the region's TVET strategy. So we want to thank you for this. Thank you for your support. Thank you for joining us all. Over to you, Dr. Iriarte.
Thank you, Latoya. Thank you for the invitation to be here moderating this seminar. Good morning, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to this section of the webinar on the futures of education. We would like to take the next 20 to 25 minutes to think about the future, looking ahead to the year 2050 and beyond, and put our imagination to work to spark ideas on what kind of education we will need to face the challenges of work and economic security for the world our children and grandchildren will have to live in. And in order to help us on this, we have invited 4 very distinguished panelists who have already been introduced before by my colleague Latoya Swaby. These are Mr. Gonzalo Grania from the International Labor Organization, Professor Halden Morris from the University of West Indies, Professor William Jack from Georgetown University, and representing Caribbean youth, Mr. Sudarshan Motilal. They will present their views and perspectives on several issues, including the new skills needed for the future labor market, the relevance of education and training to a changing labor market, the emerging technologies in society, such as artificial intelligence, data sciences, robotics, teachers' preparations in terms of technology, curriculum reform, and implementation. So I would like to ask each one of them to take around 3 minutes to very briefly share with us their ideas, concerns, and especially their recommendations for the future of education. And I'd like to start the round of intervention with Mr. Gonzalo Grania from the International Labor Organization. Mr. Grania, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ramon. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, UNESCO, for the invitation to participate. Well, as Ramon said, and during the introductions, I'm with the ILO, but I'm with the Sinterfor. Sinterfor is a technical service of the ILO specialized in TVET and skills development, and we are based in Uruguay, in the southern cone of South America. So I come from the world of work, basically, and the TVET and skills development, not so much education as a whole. And of all the different dimensions and possible topics that we were given preparing this intervention, I will focus mainly on policy issues and institutional aspects of TVET and skills development. So in the first place, and I have only 3 minutes, so this is quite a challenge, Ramon, to present many ideas. But the first topic I would like to go through is based on the ILO Centenary Declaration for the Future of Work, which was adopted in 2019. And I think we really need to adopt a human-centered approach to economic, social, labor, and employment policies. Now, what does this mean for TVET and skills development? I think one recommendation is that we need to promote really the acquisition of skills, competencies, and qualification for all workers throughout their working lives. So lifelong learning here is really the cornerstone of this approach. We need to address existing and anticipated skills gaps and make sure that education and training systems are responsive to labor market needs, taking also, of course, into account the evolution of work, the industrial, the 4.0, for instance, industrial revolution. Now, the second point I would like to make, the second recommendation, draws on something that Nora Wu in her excellent presentation mentioned also, and I am using the same words. In the development of TVET and skills policies, we really need to adopt a whole of government approach. And in the whole policy cycle, as a matter of fact, I would say. Now, this is so because TVET policies really need to be coherent and articulated with economic policies, industrial and sectorial policies, and of course, education policies. And in our region, in Latin America and the Caribbean, I really think that ministries of labor and ministries of education really need to have a much more fluent and better dialogue and cooperation between them. This is, of course, this is nothing new, but this is something that I would like to see more for the future. In the third place, for skills development and TVET policies to be relevant, good quality, and responsive to labor market needs, we need to strongly involve all the stakeholders. Tripartism, social dialogue in TVET, and the active participation of employers and workers' organizations together with government at the national and sectoral levels are imperative. And for instance, the creation of sector skills councils or national tripartite bodies for the management of the TVET policies and the skills development policies are key. When it comes to youth employment, school to work transition, and skills development, I would recommend that efforts are made to develop and or strengthen the quality apprenticeship or dual training systems and programs. This is very important in ILO's agenda for the coming years, because there's going to be a discussion in the 2022 and 2023 International Labour Conference about the possibility of adopting new standards when it comes to quality apprenticeship and work-based learning. And these systems, quality apprenticeship systems and dual training systems, need to have certain building blocks as we see it, being them strong social dialogue, clear roles and responsibilities for each stakeholders of the system, adequate and stable funding mechanisms, and a clear and easily comprehensible legal framework. And finally, to wrap up, a word to educators and people in career guidance that I believe are among the audience here. It is, of course, important that every young person and worker take advantage of every learning opportunity in this paradigm of lifelong learning. But we have to remember that unemployment, underemployment, and dysfunctional labor markets are structural problems, not individual responsibilities. So young people in unemployment or underemployment should not feel that the problem or their responsibility lies mainly within themselves. And this is very important to me, a message for educators that I would like to see and recommend more, is that we need really to take that burden, so to say, of young people's shoulder and all the debate and the concept in Spanish, we call it ni en educación, ni en trabajo, nor in education, nor in work, nor in training. We need to see that as a lack of opportunities for young people and not as something that should be on their shoulders. So thank you. These are my 3 minutes, and I hope I have a second opportunity to participate in the debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Grania, and for your insights, your ideas. And next, I would like to ask Professor Haldane Morris from the University of West Indies to share his views and perspectives on these issues. Dr. Morris, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rahman. Secretary Generals of UNESCO, Ms. Hu, colleagues, good morning. Let me first commend UNESCO for staging this series of webinars. Indeed, they are timely, addressing current futuristic critical issues. This webinar in particular, entitled Work and Economic Security, is no doubt addressing everybody's business. Without smart, creative economic security will not, well, creative work, economic security will not be achieved, either by individuals, by family, indeed the country. And of course, I'm elated to be asked to be a part of this webinar because I believe this is my responsibility. It is my responsibility to be here. I'm responsible for the development and implementation of the Masters of Arts and the MPhil PhD programs at the University of the West Indies in leadership in technical vocational education and training. Hence, my comments may be surrounded about those conceptual framework that drives program development at leadership level and so on. But nonetheless, I will address some of the issues that are at hand. Dr. Khan and Ms. Hu has placed the perspective of, in terms of statistics about education and the world, the work landscape globally. Work is and will be available in abundance. This is known. However, the human capital may be inadequate to satisfy the future work requirements if actions are not taken now to fix the human capital challenges, which are very many. Compensation for work does not guarantee independence and security. The key to economic security is engagement in valuable work, such as engagement in which are in great demand, and as such can demand high competitive wages. And this is a challenge, in particular in TVET areas, where people think that TVET is really just for low-income, low-level sort of work. But I think we're moving out of that domain now. As the world navigates through IR4, it is evident that the landscape of the world of work is rapidly changing and requires specialized training to deliver effectively in this domain. We need to bear in mind that a large percentage of today's workforce does not have geographical boundaries. Persons may be domiciled in Jamaica, for example, and fully engaged in work elsewhere in the world. Today's technology, of course, facilitates all of this. And hence, I will focus a little bit on the technology. Evidently, there are many aspects of work that must be accomplished on site, but several, of course, will be on the internet, and we have to recognize that. Importantly, preparation for the world of work is of critical importance and requires special skills. As such, critical thinking, soft skills, knowledge, and specialized technical training is evidently going to be critical in this domain. COVID-19 has introduced many challenges. However, for these to be successfully navigated through, we need to ensure that the quality of the workforce is prepared with this in mind and with the many challenges that were brought forward. The need to revisit our philosophy as nations in the Caribbean is related to work and work practices. These must be revisited and adjusted to embrace a new norm if we are to become successful and become economically independent. Therefore, political leaders, policymakers, and other stakeholders must be re-engaged and must be equipped with appropriate strategies and innovation to empower the nation to benefit from futuristic work opportunities and practices. In this digital age, it is forbidden for us to harbor the thought of non-connectivity or low connectivity. In fact, it is my view that it is becoming increasingly necessary for nations to approach access to technology in other ways other than through inefficient private providers. And whatever that may bring, it may be required for the nation or the nations to look at this as a national domain and work from it from that perspective. Training going forward, therefore, will require unprecedented bandwidth to deliver effectively, especially as it relates to TVET. We cannot provide those online simulations and so on without the appropriate bandwidth. Industries and commerce must be engaged in appropriate manner to identify the current and future training needs to matriculate to the ever-changing work landscape. I'm not saying that this does not happen now, but as we move forward and looking at IR4 and where we're heading to, we need to look at the industry interacting with education as closely as possible to ensure that we can matriculate easily as a workforce. The implication of this, of course, is that the curriculum at the primary, pre-primary, secondary, and tertiary levels need to be revisited and perhaps revamped to embrace the strategies of the new workforce or the new labor market. We have heard from UNESCO that there's focus on entrepreneurship, for example, and this is in fact not a given skill. People are not just entrepreneurs automatically. There needs to be training for persons to become effective entrepreneurs. Promote equality and gender equality. This is happening, I'm sure. We have this happening. We go to work sites and we see all sort of gender balances as it relates to those workplaces. We have to revisit how we condition TVET and how we put it forward as a training requirement and how people are facilitated in this. And of course, the whole business of sustainability, the green economy and what is happening. We have to refocus and reinvent the wheel to ensure that we are not destroying the world for the future, for those generations that are coming behind us. I'll stop here. I know there are lots that I could say here, but you know, I guess the questions will pull out some of those that you really want to hear. Thank you, Sir Rahman and colleagues.
Thank you, Professor Maurice, again for your insights. We invite all participants to use the chat if you would like to ask specific questions to any of our panelists or share your own views on the topic discussed. And next, I would like to ask Professor William Jack from Georgetown University to take the floor. Professor Jack, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Ramon, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me. Special thanks to Tyrone Brown for being in touch and connecting me with this group. I very much appreciate it. So I'm a microeconomist. I do research in developing countries on the impacts of various policies from health and education and road safety even. So a broad range of topics and policies we look at using the techniques of randomized controlled trials, etc. That's just a little bit of background. So, my reaction to the earlier presentations is that it's important to understand the world in which we live by getting data on the existing landscape, if you like, and to diagnose problems and to measure the current state of the world. This is important to know what you're talking about, of course. Understanding what policies can be effective in addressing shortcomings that we observe, that's another kettle of fish. And that's a really difficult challenge and one that policymakers all over the world face in all sectors. What will happen if we adopt certain policies? And we can't rely on faith and beliefs about policies. We have to rely on evidence. So I think the people around this webinar table are faced with a critical challenge of discerning the evidence and using that to inform policy. So Tyrone asked me to respond to a couple of issues and suggest some strategies for addressing certain issues that have arisen maybe. Now, I don't propose to have any strategies that I can say, have been tested, but I think instead I'll respond with some questions, if you like, to these issues. So the first was on automation of work and how that has led to a really structural change in the labor market in the Caribbean over the last 2 decades and the need to reskill people who have been laid off. So the questions there that I think about are, do we need to train laid off workers? Is that the best thing to do? And these are difficult questions to ask because they sound like they're not respectful of the people at hand. But in some cases, it might be best to keep such workers doing the same jobs that they've done in the past and to slow down the process of structural change. that might be much easier than actually retraining them to work in new industries. It just might be difficult to teach an old dog like me new tricks. And that's a challenge that we face. Of course, we should think of better ways to train people. And if we can find better ways to train older people, then that's fine. We might look at retirement options. So would actually having people just not work be an option that is more efficient than trying to train them to do jobs that they're not suited to. Other things involve technological competencies and how we will train people. First of all, if we want to train everyone to be in high-tech industries, we need to make sure that there's there's enough labor demand to employ them all. I worry that this move could lead to a hollowing out of the income distribution, where some people have high skills and are very highly compensated, but a lot of other people are left behind. And then the issue of what kind of training to deliver to people. Professor Morrison mentioned this. Do we train them in technical skills, or do we train them in critical thinking? Well, we'd like to train everyone in everything, of course, but there's a real trade-off here that we have to address in policy terms of what kinds of training will we try to deliver to people. And there the answer may well differ depending on what level of education you're talking about, primary, secondary, or tertiary. Finally, two other things were the move to part-time and contract employment. Here, I think the issue is that with contract employment, so-called gig economy, when the connection between workers and firms is much less robust, then excuse me, it's difficult for firms to invest in new skills of their workers because the workers can leave much more easily. And then the question is there a role for government to subsidize on-the-job training in some way or another? Of course, all of these subsidy programs naturally lead to incentive problems and to budget constraint problems. And so the design of those policies is non-trivial. The final thing is youth unemployment. And here I was thinking, again, as someone who looks back on his youth some time ago, I was thinking, what is it about the youth? They lack experience, that's for sure. But really, if we're moving into a new world of new jobs and new skills, then all of us lack experience in those industries in some sense. And the youth are in fact potentially easier to train than older people. So the youth, I think, here really are our asset and our opportunity. We just need to think about ways to incorporate them into this economy. Again, I haven't been at all definitive in my suggestions, but there's just some observations I've made on these comments. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for going over time.
Thank you, Professor Jack, for your insights and questions. And finally, I'd like to invite Mr. Sudarshan Motilal to take the floor and share his perspective as representative of the Caribbean youth. Mr. Motilal, the floor is yours.
Very much. And I'd like to thank the team that organized today's webinar for giving the opportunity to express views and certain things from my perspective as a youth in the Caribbean, from Trinidad and Tobago, on the topic at hand. So while starting, in a presentation at a seminar 3 years ago on labor market-based, Professor Andrew, a professor of economics and the university director of the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies, he made a statement, and it's relevant today, and I just thought that I'll bring it up. And it's that unemployment is regarded as one of the most challenging economic problems facing the governments of the Caribbean. Providing that employment to people is a topic that is a deep topic, and I'm about to give some views on my perspective, and I'd like to narrow in from more of a youth stand on what this relates to us. So the first thing is, if the education system is uniquely positioned to facilitate rapid change in the labor market, and I saw that the gig economy was mentioned. So the trend of the world that we're seeing is that we're moving from labor intensive to capital intensive. And before I say anything else, this is all due to development in technologies. And then with the recent outbreak of COVID-19, it has even push this further forward. So technology training is something that is becoming inevitable. And having said so, I think that there are two things that should be integrated into the policy of education, and they should be mandatory. Just like how maths and English are considered mandatory subjects, I think that there are two new subjects that plenty schools and institutes are offering, but should be mandatory moving forward into this new age. And those two things are simple. The first one is information technology. It's no secret by now that it is becoming more and more dominant in every aspect of our life. Now they can do almost everything on the computer, from work to lifestyle. So having students be ready to and having them constantly updating their IT skills is something that should be consistent from the primary school level straight to any stage of education and development. And the second thing, which is a very important one as well, and it relates to the gig economy, is entrepreneurship. So entrepreneurship is now it has been offered at CAPE at the lower six and upper six level in secondary schools, and it is a subject that provides the integral business sense and how it is to go out and survive in an economy and to give yourself that economic stability that is needed. So those are two things that I think should be integrated towards the policies for education. There's a very popular saying that technology is best when it helps bring people together. And I think that's why we need to focus on the IT and the next side of it, the entrepreneurship, people to integrate this. The second thing is, while I was preparing for today, I wanted to be as prepared as possible. And I had some discussions with primary school teachers that I know, secondary school teachers that I know, and even tertiary level teachers and teachers that I'm in contact with. And I'm able to summarize what they told me into 3 statements, which are that the curriculum didn't change. It was the method of teaching that has changed. The topics are the same, but delivery is different now. And this wasn't a gradual, structured process. It was more forced upon due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So emerging technologies, with this, emerging technologies have become the path without question. And things like robotics, augmented reality, virtual reality are tools that are yet to be explored in how they are to provide the best benefit to students and even past that in development. These things, these technologies are coming into the system of our life, and I see them to be having a very, very important part. I'll give a quick example. When I started my business studies, there was a project going on in school where it was a national entrepreneurship program where you got together as a team and you were able to go onto a piece of software where you had your own business as a team and you had a board of directors in school, about 6 people, and you had to run a business and make decisions where you're not risking real things. You're doing it on the augmented reality, but it gives you the practical feel before you actually go out. So that's why I think that emerging technologies will play a part in the risk factor and so on in moving forward. The third thing is teachers being adequately prepared to facilitate learning. I know that in IT, teachers are being trained the use of technology to facilitate learning. And I know that there are many programs involved, some are even UNESCO funded in Trinidad and Tobago. But the e-learning ecosystem, there's a generation gap between the teachers and the students. And this is how I see it from a youth perspective. Yeah, you can't tell. There is a generation gap. And this could be addressed in a manner where I think the teachers or those who are providing the information need to come onto the playing field of the students. students are very, very versatile in the platform of technology and cyberspace. And I think that there are certain things that we can do in the education system to bring the education system to the students instead of creating a platform where both meet on. So, for example, the use of things like I know Zoom has been quite useful in teaching recently, but certain things in terms of how we bring lessons to students is something that I think could be worked on and new ideas could be created. And one that I really like was the one that I previously mentioned in terms of the augmented reality and putting that practical aspect on a screen where you can experience the practical aspect of whatever is being studied without the risk factor. And the last thing that a question that was posed in light of time is, are training programs for career transition easily accessible? Now, this is something that I would like to quote Professor William Jack, or well, not quote, but just a re-highlight on something he mentioned. And he said that he basically spoke on the relationship between training and acquiring an education or acquiring a piece of academic qualification and the availability of work for it. So that is something that I think is a topic that is quite important. Many students, and this is how I see it, and this is how my peers relate to me. Many students get into fields that they are unsure what the future will lie for them. And I think that the career advice of our country and our Caribbean and our world is something that needs to be developed and taken furthermore as we embark onto this new age. And the availability to transition from your career from a beginner level to intermediate and know what are the steps that is needed to be taken in acquiring an education, getting experience and moving up the ladder, or from the instead of the intra level, from inter level to moving from a career to another career, if it is what is needed. I think that is something that isn't as strong as it should be currently, and it's something that we can brainstorm ideas and figure out ways in how the career advice and career guidance is brought towards our people, our students. So that is my brief breakdown on the questions posed that I would like to present to the webinar. And I would like to thank again everyone for listening to the views and giving the opportunity to express these remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Modalal, representing the Caribbean youth, for your insights, and also many thanks again to our distinguished panelists for their insights and on the future of education. We're running out of time for this session, but I'd like to take these final minutes to give our panelists a chance to react to some of the questions we've been receiving through the chat. And I'd like to share the first question is for Mr. Gonzalo Grania from David Weeks. And it says, to what degree have you seen curriculum modifications in the Caribbean region being adapted to include this? And you mentioned that the youth is not responsible for a system that doesn't work properly for them. And I couldn't agree more. We need to look beyond the education sector in order to change the system. Any interesting policies or cases in Latin America and the Caribbean that you would say are making the system work better for youth? Mr. Gonzalo Grania, the question is for you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, these are two very interesting questions. The first one by Faye Dyer touches upon the issue of e-learning, especially in the TELT system, and how if there has been curriculum modification. Well, let me first tell that this whole thing of e-learning and in the context of the pandemic is, of course, and of digital skills and all that is related to this is, of course, a very important issue in these times, in these very difficult times of lockdown, and when the training institutions, the TELT institutions are shut down. but it's definitely not an easy fix. And when we are discussing with our member institutions in all Latin America and the Caribbean, what measures have been taken and the challenges that they face, because we have to remember that accessibility, access to technology, access to devices, access to connectivity in our region is of course not a given. And it's not, especially not a given for the public of the TVET institutions. So there are very important bottlenecks and challenges to overcome there. After you have overcome the hardware sort of dimension of the problem, then you come to for instance, curriculum developmental modifications, you come to teacher training, you come to developing materials, to come to develop what pedagogy you're going to use for e-learning, which is of course not the same for presence learning. So yes, we are seeing our TVET institutions. We have had very recently some work with the Heart NSTA Trust from Jamaica in trying to assist them or help them think about all the different dimensions that comes into a digital strategy, an institutional digital strategy, which is much more than, for instance, curriculum modification or just the hardware or just the teacher training and so on. But we are seeing, yes, curriculum modifications in the Caribbean to address this challenge. And going to the second question by Paulo Alfaro, I think I would first like to say that when we say youth, we should not think of the young people as a homogeneous group. In Spanish, it is easier for us to say like youth and youth as the plural of youth, but different groups inside the same age cohort, social group face very different challenges, of course. And it's not the same to be thinking of youth coming from low-income families with poor educational background, that middle-income families or upper-class families. And most of the policies and programs that are thought of are for middle to low-income youth, and they present very challenges. And I'm very sorry to have to answer to Pablo that I don't find really many policies at the policy level that have really helped change the reality for youth at the national scope. I see programs that are very that may sometimes be successful, but are of really they're difficult to scale up at the national level and really impact on the youth unemployment problem at the national level. What we do see is that the policies that do have an impact, at least some impact, are those on the one side that combine youth policies in different dimensions. It's not only an issue of employment policies and labor market policies for youth, but it is to have to do with transition from school to work, employment, health issue, living policies, and so on. So it's complementary. And but the employment policies, active labor market policies that have shown some results are those who generally tend to combine training on the job training and off the job training, like for instance, all the workspace learning systems and quality apprenticeship programs. But quality apprenticeship programs where you're targeted at low-income youth usually need a pre-apprenticeship stage, which in many countries of our region are not present. But what I would like to highlight here is, and what I think is very important, is that when we are thinking of the design of youth policies and programs, what is lacking in most countries is the voice of the youth, taking into account what the youth need and what they want and what their interests are and their possibilities are. And this is something that I fear is lacking in most countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gonzalo Grania. I think we're running out of time for this section, so I would like to give back the floor to Dr. Faryal Khan for the final part of this event. Dr. Khan.
Yes, thank you so much. I was, but there are a few questions. Perhaps if everybody agrees, we can take a few minutes, just to, 4 or 5 minutes, because this was such a rich dialogue, and it would be really good to have maybe. So there have been some questions to the panel. Dr. Raymond, would you like to just?
We still have one question for Professor Morris from the University of West Indies. And it has to do with something he also mentioned. I will just read it. Professor Morris, you also highlight one major issue, bandwidth. To what degree have our sovereign governments have been able to impress on these ISP entities the necessary paradigm shift that requires them to be responsible shareholders and facilitators in this new world with its new skills and new jobs? Professor Morris?
Thank you, Dr. Raymond. Colleagues, this issue of bandwidth has been with us from the beginning of the internet. And I don't think governments want to take responsibility for providing internet. But when it becomes a national concern, when it becomes a major part of education, when it becomes a major part of doing work, there needs to be some policy change as it relates to provision of bandwidth. As such, my view is that there needs to be some national effort to put in place the bandwidth that is required for public good. Now, this is not happening. Governments across the Caribbean are still in dialogue with private providers to provide the necessary infrastructure and bandwidth for their nations. I know we had at some time started the Caribbean system for communication and so on. I'm not sure where that is, but that needs to be revisited to see if there is some kind of cooperation with governments to provide the necessary infrastructure. I know we have cables across the Caribbean Sea that provides internet service and so on. And I know there are satellites that are available to provide internet service, but I'm not sure that the governments are empowered to negotiate with those bigger providers to give the necessary space for them to operate. I don't think it is possible for education to survive effectively in the public space as it relates to communication. That is what the private providers are doing. They're really just giving you space to send mails and to communicate vocally and so on. But when it comes to big visual transmission of images and so on, and to make education work in a natural way, they're not responsible for that and they're not doing it. I'm pretty sure none of the providers are doing it because this is mega bucks to put in the necessary infrastructure to provide that kind of bandwidth. So my view then is that governments need to get together in the Caribbean and do something about this. Rent space from the satellite companies, get their own fiber links, and do whatever needs to be done to provide this kind of communication. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Morris. And with Dr. Morris's answer, we have now reached the end of this section and shall move on to the closing remarks, which will be introduced by Dr. Faryal Khan from UNESCO. Dr. Khan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Raymond. And this was a really excellent roundtable with hands-on experience, but also some very key messages, overarching messages. Clearly, the landscape is changing, and we need to, and as we plan ahead and look at plan for the future of education, we really need to there are some key messages that have come up during today's discussion. I'm going to be joined today with Ms. Katerina Camarinas. Katerina, are you with us now?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, Dr. Katerina Camarenius is the Social Affairs Officer at UN ECLAC. She has worked for over 25 years on governance, development planning, and sustainable development issues at the United Nations, academia, and local government. You are currently working at the sub-regional headquarters of UN ECLAC in the Caribbean, based in Trinidad and Tobago. And your PhD is in urban and regional development planning from the University of Paris, Sorbonne. And I see you have edited and contributed to a number of books. So we are so honored that you have agreed to share some of, synthesize some of the key messages from the discussions as we prepare the concluding remarks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Khan, for the introduction, and good afternoon to everyone here in Trinidad and Tobago. It's already afternoon. It is my great privilege to be here with you today for the closing of this morning's webinar, which is part of this very important debate UNESCO is leading on the futures of education. In this session, we looked particularly at how to secure employment and stable income in the Caribbean. And this new pandemic situation we are living, of course, we understand that this is an objective that is more challenging than ever. This has been a very informative session, so I thank all of you for the presentations and very rich discussion. And as we wrap up, I would like to highlight a few points. Well, first of all, to commend Caribbean countries for their very active and quite extraordinary level of support in response to the pandemic. We hope and we really commend them for their effort. We hope they can maintain it for those who are most vulnerable. Also, they did these efforts while at the same time working to build more inclusive and resilient labor markets. So the strategies of Caribbean countries, today we also saw the very interesting example of Grenada, to serve their stakeholders, are excellent examples of how partnerships and social entrepreneurship can be mobilized to complement public action, public investment, and find flexible and tailored solutions for the school systems, for the students, for the families in general. However, and despite this important investment, we know the period has resulted in a widening of pre-existing gaps and posing a risk of reversing progress on SDG 4 on quality education for all. Today, particularly, we are looking at SDG 4, but in general, on our trajectories towards the 2030 agenda. We have seen today how Grenada, with an almost 100% enrollment rate, is now dealing with the situation of 43% of their children having access to online schooling. So as we know, most of these countries and territories in the Caribbean have experienced extended school closures due to the pandemic. This is a situation that is quite specific to the sub-region, and a ECLAC survey recently analyzed the situation of school closures, and 7 of the 10 Caribbean countries that reported on this survey reported school closures for 6 or more months. So, of course, in this context, in this very specific context, digital strategies have proved to be of the greatest importance. We have all observed directly, those of us who are living here in the sub-region in particular, how digital globalization has shifted the way we live and work and study and consume. So this crisis really has accelerated these transformations beyond anything we could ever have imagined. And at the same time, it also served as a global accelerator on the use of technologies in education, how this can be used to prepare Caribbean citizens for this rapidly changing context. And today we heard about how to bridge the human capital gap in particular. So the period raised essential questions about the future of education on the one hand, but also on the precarity and vulnerability of our job markets, the skill sets that may be required not only for current and future jobs, but also for the future in general. within this unprecedented unemployment and job crisis, ECLAC is advocating that other than looking strictly at the future of education and the future of work, the Caribbean should also take this period as an opportunity to refocus on the future we want in general, on our common future, to use the words of the Brundtland report. This pandemic has really exposed the need to deliver on the right to education and to rethink education systems to promote inclusive and equitable quality education and life learning opportunities for all, drawing attention to the most vulnerable. But what we are saying is that this process must be integrated within our common aspiration for the future of society within Agenda 2030. Going forward, this pandemic really presents this opportunity that in lesson that countries must come together to act now on this transformative agenda, and education can only be at the heart of such transformation. During this webinar, we've also heard a lot about some possible solutions and looking ahead in building forward better, as ECLAC is now expressing. One key aspect would be to redesign a new hybrid education system that secures the interconnection for all students and uses ICTs as an integral part of this new system. We should emphasize the need for a new emergency education model with broadband digital infrastructure as part of this new hybrid model. We need to take urgent steps in this decade of action towards 2030 to adequately invest in these education systems, that what are the skills and competencies required in this changing context, improving access to technology, using universal service funds as part of the solutions, and really reflecting on this new hybrid and emergency education model so that we can recover from this period, targeting those that are most at risk of being left behind, including students with disabilities, those with migrant and refugee status, and all those who are at risk of not re-entering the classrooms, but also looking at targeting the new areas of work, such as the green and blue economies. And importantly, today our discussions have highlighted the critical role of young persons in this debate, and the importance of listening them in this process, and the policy coherence that may be achieved through a new generation of national youth policies that may be designed for the future we want. So that's something that I also wanted to highlight today. Of course, this is not an easy exercise because we have heard many interesting and important presentations. So in closing, I would just like to take this opportunity to highlight the excellent collaboration with our partners in support to the sustainable development process in the Caribbean. And we at ECLAC are very grateful for the collaboration with UNESCO. I feel as though I've learned a lot from this session, so I thank you all for this opportunity, and I hope we can now all take these ideas forward. Thank you, Dr. Khan. Thank you all, and good afternoon.
Thank you so much for your such an excellent synthesis of the key messages of this discussion. You know, COVID-19 has offered us an opportunity to step back and you know, and really look, see what is the future we want, and how can we build back better. And I'm hearing messages. We need to invest in our human capital so that we can have young workers who are skillful and healthy. We need to have more digital transformations to support our work. We have really fast forwarded into a very, you know, COVID has really enabled us to leapfrog into a more digitized educational and work environment. And we need to also prepare our teachers so that they are comfortable with new technologies, and the curriculum is adapted to and addresses so that the curriculum addresses some of the new emerging scenarios that are we are living in a very, very different world today. So this has been a really excellent session. I want to thank each and every speaker and our distinguished panelists, our keynote speaker, our discussants, our youth representative. This has been really wonderful, and we look forward to taking these some of the key messages, and we hope they will inform the International Commission for the Futures of Education. So we are going to be sharing the key messages emerging from this discussion, and we will share them, of course, with our colleagues at the global level, so that they inform the work of the UNESCO International Commission for the Futures of Education. We would also like to invite you to take this opportunity to also, celebrate the International Education Day, which was 2 days ago, but we thought rather than having, too many events, and we are all getting a bit tired of, online webinars. So we thought we can commemorate the International Education Day today as well. And our next webinar and the final webinar on the futures of education is going to be next Tuesday. So stay tuned in with us. It's going to be the last one, and we'll complete the quartet of the 4 webinars that we have organized to take, to really, step back on the balcony and look at the future we want, as Dr. Katerina just said, beyond education, beyond work and economic security in the region. So thank you all. I take this opportunity as we wrap up to also thank our team. We have with us Ms. Latoya Swaby Anderson from the Caribbean office, Lucette Montgomery, Katharina Sean Hammer, who's our public information officer, and David Jenkins. And last but not least, I would like to once again thank our dear colleague, Dr. Raymond Iriarte, with who, we really need your support in the Caribbean region, and it is wonderful that we can all work together and join hands and as one UNESCO and one UN, and with all our stakeholders and partners move ahead. So thank you all. Thank you very much.